Thank you indeed, Chris. And it's my real pleasure to be here in this great city and on such an important and critical topic, particularly for young, vibrant universities. So what I'd like to do to start off is actually what all academics do, which is to change the topic. Rather than defining how to establish a young and vibrant university, I want to take the premise that actually youth has no age, courtesy of Pablo Picasso. And while universities born recently are much more likely to be focused on the current and immediate future than they are to be captured by the past, it is the case that young universities may actually be born old. That is, they can be established in rather a traditional mode, a traditional blueprint, and based on what the founders have determined has worked before, rather than in being prepared for the future. And young, vibrant universities over time may find it hard to retain that initial vibrancy and relevance in their middle years, as their founders and their leaders and that first burst of energy that brought them into being has rather ebbed. And it is also the case and self-evident in many instances that older universities often never get old. They can become youthful and vibrant through their whole existence through great leadership and, in a sense, are youthful. And so, in a sense, I think that what we're seeking as an international and national higher education sector is a coalition of youthful and vibrant universities. But I think today what I will begin to draw on is some of those issues on starting out. How do you start out young, maintain your vibrancy, and begin to move through into take your place as you've defined by your mission on the world stage? And I think it's really key in thinking about our foundation of our institutions. We recognize each institution has its very own DNA, has its own genetic code. And it has a sense and a clear sense of its origins. Its origins are a product of the time in which it was conceived by its community leaders. Its origins and its genetic code are determined by the time and the place of its birth, in a region, in a major city, in a growing economy, in an established economy. And it's also, genetic code comes from its parents, those founders and those early leaders. So taking that genetic code and understanding origins and sense of identity is extraordinarily important for any university. But it is an important piece of vibrancy and dynamism that there is a response when your genes interact with an environment, and that in your gene environmental response determines how you're going to adapt to environmental change, how you're going to express after birth your resilience and your purpose. So I think young and vibrant, or youthful and vibrant universities pay honour to their heritage, but they are not completely captured by it. They adapt their strategic approach to predict, influence and respond to the changing environments they find themselves in. They innovate their practice over time, taking account of the new learners who come through generation after generation and their needs. And they also assimilate new bodies of knowledge almost seamlessly and moving forwards. They're good at engaging with partners to fast forward delivery of innovation and impact to support the communities they serve. And they understand the critical importance of leadership, of culture, and particularly in times when circumstances demand a change. They may be geopolitical circumstances, the government policy of the day, or factors impacting on the environment. So I actually like to coin this as almost the epigenetics of institutional adaptation to environmental change, which means we're not captured by our DNA and genetic code. Rather, the factors around us can modify that code. It remains at play, but that modification allows us to express the behaviors and the changes that need to be made in our institutions with time. And I like that concept because it means we do not in each era as an institution forget where we came from. And what I think, because of that resilience and adaptability and capacity to address the changes, I think that national systems of higher education that have many, not singular, but many youthful and vibrant universities at any age actually provide the nation with a confidence that their universities are on the world stage, but that the universities can contribute to meeting economic challenges or any global challenge or geopolitical challenge that comes away. So I think youthful and vibrant institutions define their youthfulness and vibrancy in a sense by how well they're regarded to be able to contribute as a key leader in times of those major economic and social disruptions. And when we look at the environment we're in, we see for universities now in the current and the changes, the environmental changes, as we always do, we see where we are placed globally, nationally, and regionally. The new 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development of the UN place a clear responsibility on educational institutions, including universities, to really address not only through education, but the challenges that face large swathes of the world, and which universities have the ability, through the transformative power of education or through the knowledge and innovation they can generate, to change the outcomes and contribute to global sustainable development. We're also facing an unprecedented era in our times as we watch the economic centre of gravity of the planet move in this lovely McKinsey diagram from its early AD, number 1 year AD, moved across that economic centre of gravity across time to the west, and is now moving back with that burgeoning middle class, the remarkable investment in education, some of which we've been hearing about today, and of course the power of new knowledge that will cross boundaries, of innovation, and the changes that will impact, of course, necessarily on parts of the West in particular, and Europe as it goes through its challenges with Brexit. So these geopolitical forces will cause ebbs and flows, changes that will impact on universities, whether we're talking the day-to-day on international recruitment or we're talking longer term. There are also national challenges that universities in their nation, in Australia in particular, from my perspective, need to respond to. We are seeing across the globe the move, of course, to advanced economies, moving to knowledge-based, innovation-based economies, generating a significant proportion of the GDP through that knowledge, often STEM-based, but not solely STEM-based knowledge. In Australia, we have a particular challenge, a historical reliance on our resources-based economy, and we heard this morning from Duncan discussing how we had, in a sense, been in that state and had not adapted until the terms of trade most recently have begun to challenge the economic base and produce a demand for an increase in productivity, innovation to serve the new jobs of the future. And this requires an innovation ecosystem of which universities are key players. And finally, in Australia, we know that that drives a transition from the old to a new economy, which is not a choice, which will have immediate impact on jobs currently, 5 million jobs, and remember we're a country of somewhat around mid-20 million, so 5 million is a significant number of our jobs are predicted to be eliminated by 2035, and a further group will have a medium probability of being so. And it's those jobs that cannot be replaced by automation that will be most at risk. And of course, then the requirement to have increasingly well-qualified professionals and post-school leaving credentials for the next generation's jobs. And this future skills education must be around the creative, the technology, the innovation, and of course the entrepreneurship skill set. So facing this in Australia, as we do, we face those challenges, and we come from our different perspectives as universities. Just a short and brief note about the University of Newcastle in New South Wales. You may not know it, it's about 2 hours up the road from Sydney. And its origins, its genetic code was forged in coal that was mined by reconvicted convicts on the bank of this wonderful Hunter River. And this forged a coal industry, a steel industry, and of course, as we've charted that journey for Australia, Newcastle has now seen the closure, as so many industries have, of the steel industry, and of course, the mining industry now facing significant challenge. So it's a youngish university, 52. I choose to believe that's young middle age, and reasonably it was founded in this environment of giving back to the community. This was in 1965, and it has to stay true to its compact with its community to educate the next generation, ensure participation for a region traditionally where participation in higher education has been low, and to really build engagement, to work now in the challenges we face to drive the new jobs. We all know the wonderful work of Jamil Salmi, of course. It's a sort of mantra of how to establish a journey towards a culture of excellence. And really seeing, of course, that collective capacity of talent, of favourable governance, and important abundant resources. Now, there's not a piece in that diagram which says what happens when one of those circles, for instance, abundant resources, is not there, and how you fare on the journey to excellence. And I think youthful and vibrant universities, when they start out young, have to deal with that equation when the resources are not coming as a consequence of their performance, but as a consequence of their promise. And one of the disadvantages of being young is to set out on a journey of research excellence, because research excellence takes time. It's a non-negotiable for any university that will add value to the world and its region, but it takes time to build a professorial career, maybe 20 years, maybe 30 years, so it is for an institution. And reasonably being able to engage and embark on that journey is one that is about working with staff at early parts of their careers to engage in activity, get some income, build some publications, build better publications, become recognised, and to attract interest in their global academy. It's a long journey. Some of it can be foreshortened by bringing in some great leaders, but they have to be the right leaders. Those who see a fit and energy where they might see where they are currently are somewhat lacking in energy. Professors who would like to engage in a capstone experience for their career. Leaders who are generous to a fault with younger staff, less experienced staff, and who are prepared to lead some of your major strategic initiatives. Our university established a cadre of global innovation chairs. It's been remarkable in linking out and linking through to some great scholars, but those who really do want to take their work through to have innovation and impact. To show how age plays a role, this just shows for the Australian sector, Australian universities represented by each dot. This is the total research income earned per staff member, plotted against their age. And two things come out. Age does matter to a point. So there you see the younger universities moving to the middle-aged and to the more senior universities. And you can see the ability to earn a total research income is clearly enhanced with age. But look at some of these young guns coming well above the line. Look at those who are on that trajectory here. and really are beginning to take their place well and truly beyond their years. And the great thing about youthful and vibrant universities is they can go above the line. Middle age is a difficult time. Here we are here with some universities just holding, and that's a key time, I believe, to re-establish youthfulness and vibrancy. That total university research income earned by each Australian university does in fact play a relationship with the World University Rankings in this most recent round, particularly on this part of the curve. Once you get above a kind of minimum and you begin to go up the curve. I should say for our university, we are around here, so we're just beginning, hopefully on the long climb to base camp. I think we're at base camp, we're going up the mountain. But reasonably, what this says is that it is a long journey, it's based partly on age, your resources can push you along. I was listening to NTU, Professor Minghua, that wonderful, I calculated NTU's income per FTE, they would be about here. And their ranking actually is interesting, about right for the Australian graph. So resources matter, they can accelerate your trajectory. Whether they accelerate you through to youthfulness and vibrancy is about culture. What is important is to begin to consider the issue of how, over time, Australia's higher education system, which has a median age of universities of 31, really quite young, over time, what you see is a stable number of Australian universities in that top 50, top 100 group, in fact, up to the top 200 group. You can see a stable grouping. It hasn't changed that much across time. And perhaps resources limits the universities that have that capability in moving further up in competition with their colleagues. But what we should see when we're spreading the Vegemite is it's being well spread, and there's a good return on that spreading of the Vegemite, because what you can see is across these rankings, the younger universities are now moving up and will join soon this group. So at some point, resources limit, but you would not wish to put the foot on the brakes of the younger universities rising, given the challenges Australia faces across its broad continent, and it needs those universities to be excellent and drive innovation. So there's a disadvantage of being young, but there are advantages of youth. You can, in some part, avoid the drag force of disciplinary rivalry set up across established faculties over generations and decades of prior leadership. It is easier to build interdisciplinary structures even if it's by necessity from the outset, but excellence within the disciplines, within that interdisciplinary mix, is still required. And we've heard a lot about convergence today of disciplines. Convergence is difficult. Bringing together disciplines to actually converge across their boundaries and to form new disciplines is something that challenges the orthodoxy in the academy, and most certainly for senior and established academics whose career has been in being a singular figure in their singular discipline. And I think this really captures for me the journey to convergence and its criticality. Most of us have good multidisciplinary interactions here, and this is bringing together our physicists, enabling science, engineering, material science. Some of us have built interdisciplinary, where really we've now come down to materials scientists actually converging with some of the enabling scientists to form a new discipline completely, and here a bioengineer, but converging to a new discipline, a new one which doesn't have almost an echo of the old, say a regenerative engineer, is really where the world needs us to be to address challenges, but where our academics and our leadership, sometimes the challenge of making that journey is one of the key ones. Can young universities do that more quickly? Sometimes yes, but it depends on whether they were born with that aspiration for difference and for collaboration and for convergence. We've established 4 global innovation clusters where we bring together all of the working parts. We haven't established an institute of interdisciplinary, or we haven't set out to structurally bound who goes into a building to carry out interdisciplinary work. We've brought the discipline experts together in energy, food and water, in better healthcare treatment, in future industries and strong cities. And this isn't a structural piece, this is a way of working. This is about funding those projects across those disciplinary boundaries. And the clusters do not compete with the faculties. They do not compete with their shareholders for funding. They bring funding to the faculties by bringing industry, business, new opportunities, global partnerships into the cluster of capability, and across time building those bridges between disciplinary leaders that would be difficult to force through a competitive structure. This is just one of our wonderful professors, Graham Goodwin, who leads one of the world's leading systems, electrical and electronic engineering groups in systems control theory, working with our medical scientists to drive new treatments for type 1 diabetes, beginning at that interdisciplinary era, not yet in terms of the convergence of disciplines. And of course, we've heard today, you cannot engage in world-leading research if you don't know what the world is doing, and getting out more is a mantra for all young universities, and particularly for their researchers in their youth to build their connections into the global academy. Now, another advantage of being young is you need to earn some research funding, so you are much more willing to engage with partners outside the doors of your university. You will seek and engage with industry, business and government funding, and you have to therefore have built your skills in negotiation, and by engaging early, you can build these skills for life. It's in a way your right genes are being exposed to the right environment to really build a continued asset to your career. And I really think that this is a very significant piece for the young universities being established. I was in 2 800-year-old universities, one over 100 and one over 50. It wasn't until I got into an under 25-year-old university that I walked out of the door to negotiate. And we haven't stopped since, because that really is the experience of many academics who've been in academia for some time. For the next generation, this skill set is key. And reasonably, the other opportunity is to move relatively swiftly in terms of the entrepreneurship agenda. This is a great graph because it has no pattern at all. It's about benchmarking the journey to industry partnerships. Please don't look at the axis, Professor because it doesn't look like 80 million annualised. This is about the amount of Australian industry contracts earned by Australian universities per staff member by age. It's all over the place. Age doesn't play a role in your ability to engage. Some of the older universities are doing less well than some of the younger universities at this, and that means you can harness that as an asset. What I also found very interesting in the top 5 most innovative universities in the Asia Pacific, just recently published through Times Higher and through the Reuters agency, was when you do a breakdown of age for the institutions who are in that top 75. I've just highlighted some of the youngest here that you will know well. What you see is a reasonable proportion out of that top 75 of under 50s and under 100s, and that's not the shape you get normally for what I might call at the upper end of research excellence. So the drive through to innovation is picked up relatively by younger universities, it appears. And that's important. And it's important in those regional contexts across the world who are dealing with the community impacts of economic slowdown, upon whom there's a lot riding to drive the next phase of economic recovery. Some of you may have seen this book. It's called The Smartest Places on Earth, Why Rust Belts Are the Emerging Hotspots of Global Innovation. The two authors, Antoine van Achtermels, he's an investment banker with the Brookings Institution. Fred Barker was editor of the Financial Times of Holland. We hosted them in Newcastle, and we had a remarkable engagement. This book is excellent. It takes case studies of why manufacturing is moving offshore from Asia to the US and Europe as its premise. And it goes to each of the parts of the world where this has happened, and the mix required is always involved where a university is involved that has a strong research area of real relevance to an industry-based partner. So the areas that transformed had strong university leadership, civic leadership, governmental support for basic research, and traditional manufacturing skills that had previously laid fallow and were now recruited, whether it was in the University of Akron in polymer science. Akron was a place where trucks used to stop, a lot of work on the tire companies. All of that changed, but now they've brought polymer science and industries related to it. University of Albany, again, two young universities, University of Albany in nanotechnology, nanoscience, driving a renewal in the Rust Belt areas. We know the story of the Waterloo region, the Ontario corridor, that's really brought an example at scale of what universities, because Waterloo is not the only university involved, can do in terms of driving industry engagement, bringing investment to innovation and to entrepreneurship. And this has built a remarkable strength for that region and provides a model. And again, all based on talent, not an old university by any means. And this is very important in Australia because, as was also rehearsed today, we are limited in our engagement between business, industry and universities. We have a relatively low engagement of SMEs or companies with Australian universities. Our Australian firms don't tend to develop new-to-the-world innovation initiatives compared with our OECD counterparts, and reasonably, most of our research PhD qualified staff work in universities rather than in industry, as is the norm for other countries. So reasonably, that's also compounded when you're in a region such as ours, where you're moving from this economy where the biggest growth area in town is health, and where your mining and manufacturing is going backwards, and jobs are being lost. So how do you deal with that? You take a research excellence, you power through to use that to attract, be useful, and engagement in your out-the-door approaches. We have established an integrated innovation network across all of our region, up into the Hunter Valley, along the coast of New South Wales, engaging with businesses. We've put ourselves on the world stage by some remarkable innovations, a reflux classifier that is a large multinational scale innovation, medium-sized piece in terms of some lovely work in physical chemistry with saliva-based glucose tests, and that technology is being adapted to a whole range of sensors. And to a startup, this startup with Australian with University of Newcastle researchers is now based in San Francisco, and it involves a classic Australian drone. This drone doesn't go and deliver your lunch in the city, it goes across paddocks for kilometres and then arrives at its charger where it can charge overnight and then go across more paddocks to look at your cattle, your expensive cattle, and how they're doing over tens of thousands of kilometres. So drones for many roles. So one thing I will say is in that youthful vibrancy piece, it takes a lot of energy to stay young. And in doing so, there can sometimes be this rush to excellence to build that, recruit the lead researchers, that you begin to create a dichotomous institution. Research institutes where people are hunkering in to do the research, and the rest of the university, which is teaching in order to support the research institutes. That doesn't go well for long. Connecting those parts of your organisation and making sure you don't split the structures too much is absolutely building confidence of everyone in the institution, in your mission and their future. Connecting students to the frontiers of interdisciplinary research, all of your students. We have some 35,000 students from some of the most disadvantaged communities in New South Wales, more than 1,000 Indigenous students. But that is about capability. We have our Indigenous students who go to Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, because talent is everywhere. It is opportunity that is not. And I think making certain you don't, in a sense, define yourself by the high school level of your students is critical when you live in regions where talent has been untested. And I think that Hillary Clinton quote sums it up wonderfully. And you have to ensure your students who are your graduates, who are your community leaders, participate fully with your researchers in the challenge of moving forwards. Finally, the other big movement coming through that universities are being recruited to and impact on is that changing purpose of cities and urbanisation. We've looked through time where we looked at our cities in terms of trade, then we had in terms of industry, and now we see in terms of people, sticky cities, magnet cities, where population of creatives live, work, and want to stay. And that change has swept up universities who were formed, mainly in this era, to now become part of this era, and changing the mission to meet the needs of cities forming. I think Pittsburgh stands out as a city with the DNA, having visited and had engaged with Pitt and the absolute remarkable work doing there. The analogue to Newcastle is immediate. But they have become a magnet city through purposing the leadership, again, university, civic, community leadership, the power of the research to now recruit the Googles, to recruit all of the automation, a very significant digitisation industries. So how universities contribute to the city landscape, I just thought it was worth showing. This is RMIT, a young university in the middle of Melbourne. This is University of Newcastle and QUT in Brisbane. And what we're looking at here is bringing design, creative practice, business innovation, health and social inclusion. And this is our new magnificent building in the centre of the city, business innovation, entrepreneurship, creative industries, in to be permeable where people can engage and begins to change cities to the perennial smart cities. And that's just an innovation hub. To finish off that journey, so young universities have challenges when they start out. They can take some opportunities to be agile through industry engagement, to change their region's future, to transform the jobs and roles for the future graduates. And innovation and entrepreneurship has to be available to everyone, not just at the high-end researcher, but for those students coming through the door from backgrounds where they are going to need to find a different career path than the one our professors have taken. But what happens when we have the challenges facing the young and youthful as they move with agility is the culture of change. How do we work with academia, our change, and the leadership required to build a culture whereby that change occurs in, as it were, a way that does not result in jolts and starts for an organisation. And this is just a graph showing satisfaction scores for universities across the world in academics. And you can see Australia scores relatively low for all staff compared, there's only a few lower, compared to the world. And that's an interesting place to start. They are paid the second highest, actually, in those countries. But it's not remuneration, it's culture. And I think we're going to explore this in the panel. But a couple of things. I think the future, if young universities are to remain vibrant, that approach to addressing leadership seriously and culture change seriously is going to be absolutely non-negotiable. navigating change needs leadership. We often think in our world that being a leading academic is the key. A leading academic is critical. A leading academic can really well manage their group who understand their seniority, their experience. But it's necessary, but it's not sufficient to be the academic leader of large parts of an institution. And there's a need to understand what that gap is, how to fill it, recruit for it, and retain it. And the reality of academics are perceived leaders by and large as non-creative. Indeed, some of us might not be. Institutions will be moving at different time constants for their staff. That will cause difficulty. And some staff are challenged by a future in which their disciplinary excellence may not be as relevant as in the past. There's an internalization of failure in our academic culture, high achievers, and many, many challenges. A fear of change bringing about more workloads, what I call asking thoroughbred horses to carry the workload of these Clydesdales that can bring people to a point where they no longer wish to continue in their academic career. So we're going to talk in the panel about how do we move into this next piece, this next era of the geopolitical changes, the need to change economies, the need to take advantage of convergence, of drive new industries, jobs through entrepreneurship. How do we work with the future workforce of universities to really build the leadership required in a way that most large companies do? Certainly companies who have billions of revenue, which universities do. How do we build those programs, not of the template programs of the past? How do we develop future higher education professionals who work every day in our institutions to make sure we have the best? So finally, as our university, I think it's critical for any university to be clear, to reflect their origins in their statement of their future vision. And ours is simple. It is simply to stand as a global leader, distinguished by a commitment to equity and excellence. That's very important to us, to create a better future through a focus on innovation and impact. We rank currently in the top 8 in the country for the number of fields that were well above world standard in our Excellence Research Australia. That's in the top 8 for research excellence. We're also in the top quartile for universities in equity, and we are the only university in Australia to be in those top quartiles for both. But we maintain our commitment through our founders. But through our plan, the key themes, simple, succinct, very focused on that enduring commitment, on our graduates who will make that difference. We respect and laud excellence and discovery, but we seek to drive global and regional impact. We engage with our partners across the globe, but not at the expense of our communities. Our staff are going to make a mark, and our future, and to realise this, will have to be sustainable. So finally, I think the last word should go to Jamal Sami. So if you're going to stay youthful and vibrant, you've got to need inspiring, persistent leaders, because we get tired, colleagues, in this room. So for all of the leaders who've been before us, the responsibility is to continue that journey. We need a strong strategic vision of where the institution is going, a philosophy of success and excellence, and a culture of continued reflection, organisational learning and change. Because the alternative is not an option. If you're complacent, if you go into middle age without that ambitious vision, if you cease to want to change the way you operate, if you have a sense that life has become more difficult as an institution, then the question isn't about being youthful and vibrant, it's how do you re-establish youthfulness and vibrancy? And of course, that means that with a lift in the step and with moving forwards, great institutions invariably do and begin to charge up that graph on a different trajectory. That's just to leave you with what the industrial Newcastle has now become, a harbourside city with cranes in the sky and great partnerships with universities, their graduates as alumni, and the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor McMillen. We're a bit pushed for time. I think we do have time for maybe one question from the floor, if anyone wishes to bring one to the floor. Thank you, Phil.
Can I just declare that you are the winner of the ranking for cool campus buildings in Australia, at least? Number one. You talked a lot very passionately and convincingly. Thanks very much for the presentation. I thought it was excellent. On the area of interdisciplinarity, I'm really curious as to the structure you've created obviously facilitates that, but how much can you impose that kind of work from the top down? How much do you have to leave it to the organic connections being made on campus? What's the role of leadership there in terms of trying to facilitate it?
Look, I think we've thought long and hard about this, and we have got very strong faculties, health and medicine and engineering in particular. And we also have a glory of a bushland campus, but it means that people don't interact because they're at quite long distances from each other. So what we've done is to create the cluster. The cluster model works by bringing industry partners, government policymakers, bringing in employers, bringing in international leaders in interdisciplinary areas. Because when industry leaders talk, they don't talk in disciplines, they talk of the problem they're trying to solve. And by making this an environment where research centres, institutes, individual leaders come, they invariably do, because the opportunity to hear about needs for research that they may be able to contribute to draws people in. But the art form is in brokering the relationships of people who are there who may not have met each other before, and by bringing them through to the next meeting together. One of the areas at the moment is technology-assisted healthcare, extraordinarily important across the world, particularly in aged care and rehabilitation. And we have someone who nicely straddles a clinician who's involved in rehabilitation science. And so you've then got a broker who is interested in the clinician science and in the engineering science to draw it together. Otherwise, and what you then do is show how that works by ensuring that you may place that in front of a minister, may place it in front of an industry leader, because that is what draws in policymakers, that you can bring that together. And then once people see it works, so the great thing about academics is, I always say, and you know, myself included, you can take a long time to think through the evidence, but once you see something working, then you move relatively quickly. The criticality is not to have a structure that competes with your faculties, that earns money separately from your faculties. It is the earner for the faculties. We have a Newcastle Institute of Energy and Resources. It's just powering through health, mental health and mining. It's powering through balanced land use, the social issues of land for energy and food security. And it's doing it seamlessly because it's with the industry. It brings the problem in. It finds the people to work together to do the solution. And then the cross-talk starts. If there's fundamental value in the question, the researchers will find it. So we've tried a number of different approaches, and I agree with your analysis. So we'll see if this goes.
Thank you very much, Professor McMillen. Can we have a round of applause for that presentation, please? We just need to make a quick change to the stage.